Did the anti-immigration sentiment have any influence on the Brexit vote? What can be made of David Cameron's resignation as the UK's Prime Minister? How is Britain's decision to quit the European Union likely to impact African markets? For how long will trade relations between South Africa and the EU remain intact? What time is it? It's question time. Welcome to the show. My name is Mpho Tsedu. In a move that resulted in the resignation of United Kingdom's Prime Minister David Cameron, a British referendum had to be used to determine whether Britain should remain part of the European Union or leave. The margin was close, with 51.9% of the voters supporting the Leave campaign, while 48.1% voted to remain. Latest reports indicate that more than 1 million people want to change their vote from Leave to Remain. Earlier this month, an economic partnership agreement was signed between the EU and the SADC region, and its future hangs in the balance. Meanwhile, South Africa's presidency says local banks and financial institutions are well positioned to withstand financial shocks to the system resulting from the so-called Brexit. We are live. If you can call us and air your views, the number to dial 089-110-4210. Our Twitter handle at Question Time 24. My guest, Leboang Pheko. She's a senior researcher and fellow and political economist at the Trade Collective. And joining us from our Pretoria studios is Professor Lesiba Tefu, who is a political analyst and attached to the University of South Africa as well. Let me welcome both of you. Brexit, it was trending. We know it is still trending even today. Why should I bother?
Because we live in a global community, and this signals the UK's current exit signals a kind of a return to a very insular, a very myopic, very nationalistic, and very xenophobic approach to international relations. And I mean, this was obviously, as your intro said, was fueled partly by anti-immigration sentiment, by Islamophobia, and by a return to a Britain that used to be great, a post-colonial power which is no longer powerful, and the amount of misinformation and disinformation that led a lot of people to unwisely seek a Brexit seems to be one that, of course, is quite regrettable. But I think we should be also concerned because the nature of communalism and internationalism is such that every single region is interconnected. So there are bound to be repercussions even on our own relations within with the European Union, with Britain, and within ourselves as Africa, as Asia, as the rest of the world. Now
let's look at those repercussions. What is it? How am I likely going to be affected by this Brexit?
Look, there are a few things. Number one, our economy. Now, the one thing is that I think I should backtrack a bit by saying that I think we also need to ask different questions. And the one question is, what sort of opportunity does this Brexit bring for African countries? The current disarray that is certainly going to be felt across the European Union and in the UK, what's left of it, because of course Scotland and Ireland are also agitating to do a short left themselves, is one that we need to look at with some sobriety and very strategically. And I'm always concerned that we seem to paint ourselves as the victim of international circumstances rather than carving out our own position within that. But that said, we have to look at things around the economy. We have to look at certain key sectors which may or may not be affected. We need to look at the fact that there's a rumor that says that we might lose 0.1% of our GDP. Now, if our growth figures were at 6, 7, 8, 9%, that would not be a train smash. But given that our growth statistics for 2016 are probably going to be at zero. So 0.1 minus 0 is, away from 0 is quite significant already. We also have to look at the fact that our agricultural sector, this kind of subsidies that we may or may not lose into Europe and most particularly into the UK, we need to look at. But I actually believe that our economy we've got a house full of our own problems, and I think that we have the kind of resilience is built in to be able to weather this storm.
Prof, let's look at the politics of this Brexit. Prof? Prof, can you hear me?
I can now.
Okay, I'm saying let's look at the politics of Brexit, the political implications thereof.
Well, it's always a pleasure to listen to Rahadi educate me in terms of economics. Let me give a brief lecture now on politics.
Yes.
Yes. Look, the fundamental question for me is, why is it that there seem to be a new nationalism that is sweeping across Europe? Are there lessons to learn from that? Mm-hmm. And are there implications politically for South Africa? I was in that part of the world until yesterday when all this happened. Okay. There was one telling statement that came across to me. One lady, when they were interviewing them in the streets after the announcement, said it can't be worse than what it is today. And somebody by the name of Donald Trump, who was also there, at least popularizing his Gulf estate, said the BRICS have reclaimed their country, they've reclaimed their sovereignty. I'm not sure where we are headed, but I suspect that sentiment is getting increasingly popular in the West among certain nations. And I doubt if we have heard the last word here. Subsumed in that, as Rahadi said, there is an element of xenophobia. That may sound too strong, because I'm also saying much as South Africa has been helped in so many ways and it remains grateful, there is a limit to which it can carry certain countries on its shoulders. So a new world is being born. A new world is being refashioned. Traditional institutions and organizations of SIS, I think, are going to be discarded. And Britain, with others, will form a new bloc, a smaller bloc, and many of those who are resisting it may end up joining it. And similarly, with Africa, we might end up looking for smaller regional blocs than the bigger ones in the interest of sovereignty.
But Prof, as a South African, when you observe the political system which the Brits subjected themselves to, referendums and all that, do you somehow wish you were perhaps subjected to the same system here in South Africa, and what would be the benefit of such?
Look, it's to the extent to which the people on the ground say that the vulnerability of our borders, the state resources that we have, the land capacity of the country we have, the taxes that we have, how far can they go, and who should they benefit first before the other? It's a very controversial point I'm making, but unfortunately that's where the world is headed. That's where the world is headed. And I can assure you, very few expected this outcome. Even Cameron didn't expect it. But I suspect it has been long coming. If there were murmurs and undertones here and there that the West was beginning to feel the pressure, and it was trying to block as many openings that allowed the foreigners to come in, because in some way they must take responsibility for the restlessness of the world, because they went to places where they destroyed what was functional, in their view rightly so, but in retrospect many of them are regretting to have gone into Iraq, to have gone into Libya, because that volatile and almost unstoppable mobility towards the West. I mean, Africans are dying in great numbers trying to cross the Mediterranean into Europe.
Yes.
And somebody must take responsibility. And I'm saying the West, to some extent, including Cameron, must take responsibility for that.
There must be something good then in the EU happening. I mean, even one particular African country up north there wants to join the EU, in fact.
Morocco. Yes. Yeah, I don't think there's anything particularly excellent that's happening in the EU. I think I agree with my good colleague there, in many respects, that this disintegration is a sign of underlying agitation, Zumpo, which actually predate the African Spring, the Arab Spring. There has been a level of agitation with immigration in the UK and across Europe for many years. I mean, people who grew up in the 1960s there will remember the signage which said, no dogs, no blacks, no Irish. Okay? And I think that this is what the UK has voted for. They voted to go back to a time when the world was flat, when they were the empire, and when they were the ruling commanding power, commandeering over 2 or 3 billion people across the globe. They don't seem to understand that the globe has substantially changed. There are multiple poles of power. Some of them are now in the global south. You have a China, you have an India, to a much lesser extent, you have a Brazil, and to a very tiny extent, you even have a South Africa. You have a Turkey. You have different poles of power which are eminent and preeminent in different contexts. Now, remember that there's a huge fear that Turkey is going to join the European Union. And of course that this is now the first country which has a majority Islamic population. Not only that, they're also one of the fastest growing economies in the world. So Europe has to think to itself, is it willing to forego its own sense of Anglo-Saxonhood at the expense of what should be unity? The other thing that's quite problematic is then, of course, as my colleague says, this other underlying fragmentation which could arise, countries like Norway, countries like France, etc. So there could be Fogxit and many other exits coming up.
Hold it there. We're going to take a quick break. When we return, we'll continue our discussion. The numbers to dial is 089-1104-210. Our Twitter handle @QuestionTime24. We shall return shortly.
Silently waiting for your spot in the limelight. Step up, people of the party. We need your energy, your greatness. Just because you don't do it for money doesn't make you an amateur. So we salute you, party comrade, with a bottle of Sedgwick's, the original Old Brown, for just $27.99 from Tops at Spa.
Welcome back. You are indeed still watching Question Time. My guest today is Lebohang Pheko. She's a senior research fellow and political economist at the Trade Collective. And joining us from our Pretoria studios, Professor Lisiba Tefu is a political analyst there. And we welcome your calls indeed on 089-1104-210. Let's look at the losses. I mean, even Barack Obama tried to campaign, for
stays it.
Yes.
Stay in.
Yes. But it happened. Trillions of rands or dollars. Or pounds.
The markets got jittery the way they always will under these circumstances. Remember when Minister Nene was retired, suddenly the markets got jittery. The markets will always get jittery when things like this arise. People sent a lot of their money offshore. Of course, there was a loss of investor confidence. And of course, African markets felt that significantly. Nigeria, Kenya, Egypt, and South Africa as the largest economies, and as the ones which have the largest stake in UK investments per se. And so I think that the internal resilience will begin to kick back in once we have seen that the sky has not fallen, but it augurs very badly. It augurs very badly because remember that Britain, we're not the only ones who feel vulnerable. I think that, and we should have perspective about this. If there's a country right now which is very vulnerable, it is the UK, Britain, in whatever form it may or may not remain. They have to renegotiate with 27 remaining EU countries. You imagine that. They have to renegotiate with 55 African countries. They have to renegotiate with over 100 WTO signatories. So this isolationist approach that they have taken is extremely problematic. They have not been able to, since 1976, they have been relying on the wings of EU negotiators and EU negotiating machinery in Europe in Brussels for most of the negotiation capacity. They don't even have the human resource capacity to deal with all of these countries all at the same time. So if anybody, I think, is vulnerable, they are.
Dougie, you are in the Val. You've been gone for a while.
Need to give my penny's worth.
Okay.
And I need to put the cat amongst the pigeons.
Okay.
Okay, number one, I think the Economist is completely out of line and she doesn't know what she's talking about. The guy that you're talking to in Pretoria, that professor,
yes,
he knows something.
Okay.
And you can listen to him because he's giving you some good advice.
Not Lebohan.
You hear what I'm saying?
Yeah.
The guy that's the Economist, she's talking the biggest lot of rubbish. You must never trust an economist because they talk rubbish to a person. It doesn't matter how you look at it.
Where's the rubbish, Dougie?
The professor has said, you know, the biggest problem here,
yes,
is that everything is going around sustainability, to sustain something, to keep something in progress. And our country is not in progress. It's halted. It's standing still.
Okay.
Where the professor has spelt it out nicely.
Okay.
He said the guys in Britain have realized that for them to carry on, they need to do something different that can sustain them into the future. And this is what we must remember. In our country also, we need some sort of thing that will be sustained in our country. At the moment, money is being stolen, is being used left, right, and center. Nobody's taking care of nothing.
Okay.
And the other thing is, when you looked at the referendum that they had, the Prime Minister of Britain, immediately after that referendum, he went and resigned. Because he realized, I've made a mistake, I didn't calculate correctly, I didn't do things right. Now, we should have a referendum regarding this president of ours, this Jacob Zuma.
Oh, okay.
That we can now get him out. Because it doesn't help us listening to the politicians. Because those politicians mean nothing to us.
Dougie.
They're only in for themselves.
Dougie, thank you very much for the call. Indeed, Prof, well, Dougie agrees with you, but he's bringing up another point here, that a referendum, and I know a lot of people were saying maybe we need a referendum in South Africa, but a referendum for what?
Yeah, it would be a referendum for what? And I wouldn't like to belabor that point, because for as long as you have the Electoral Act as is in South Africa, right? Ours is nothing but a sham democracy. I said it then, I'll continue to repeat that, and I'm glad and heartened that increasingly people are beginning to accept. Unless South Africa changes its Electoral Act, it will always have a few people, a maximum of 5 people deciding that a head of state can be toppled, and to the exclusion of the entire 50 million people. We have to go that route and change that. When it comes to sustainability, yes, I agree. It is all about that. But what do we put in place to get the system sustainable? Inter alia, get the legal framework correct, and the rule of law upheld and observed, and separation of powers being the canon and the pinnacle of governance.
Archie, you are in welcome.
Good day to you all there.
Thank you very much for the call, Archie.
I wonder if you still remember, or who remembers 5-6 decades ago that a pound was equal to 2 rands.
Yeah, we remember that.
Okay. Now, you will find that now UK seems to be in disarray. But now there's one continent which will take them out of that challenge, which is Africa. For example, now, you might see that now there's a lot of food pass between Britain and our ambassadors in the UK there. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, you'll find that now, instead of them, for UK, looking at us as number one, you've got an idea that now that Obama has been siding in this Brexit with the UK. So one is saying, sitting away from there, that now once more we are going to be used by UK to assist UK to get out of its challenges. Thank you.
How so, Archie?
For example, now we've got, we are always begging, Anticho. So even now, what is going to happen? We are trying not to get opportunity from the UK. We are trying to say, what is in it for me? What can the big master give to me?
Okay, thank you very much. Indeed, what is in it for South Africans in this Brexit?
Not much. I think I go back to my original point, which is that we need to think about our own opportunities, and we need to think about how we can build a kind of economy within and amongst ourselves, which can sustain the sort of international shocks that are bound to happen. 2008, we went into shock. Now there's the Brexit in 2016. We are still in shock, having not recovered from the shock of 2008. Now, there are a few things that also I think are quite important to bring into perspective. The one is that the UK versus the EU is not even our top 5 biggest trading partner. And that, we need a bit of perspective on that. Our bigger trading partners are the United States, Germany, the EU, Japan, China, etc. So we need to have a bit of perspective on the extent to which this is going to be a big blow to us.
Hold it there. Prof is clapping hands there.
Yes, no, I agree with Rahadi. Let her carry on.
No, but I want you to also just share with us perhaps some perspective here on the EU and the UK perhaps being or not being our greatest trading partners.
Lebu knows better about this, about economics. But all I can tell you, the UK is still going to lead the bloc. In the next 6 months, I suspect some people will have to compromise in order to accommodate and negotiate a reasonable compromise that would benefit both the UK and the European Union. And I think the mediator here, the silent mediator, would be the United States of America.
No.
Let me make this point. Yes. The EU cannot afford to lose Britain.
Yes.
Similarly, Britain cannot afford to lose the EU. However, they have gone this route and they are going to sustain it, but they will try to find a middle position, a golden mean.
I want to just say, Prof, that I think somehow this Brexit thing was used just as a political ball between the Conservatives and their counterparts. In trying to get the other party out of office, this is what was available, and they really jumped onto it. This is politics.
No. They're just playing politics. At the end of the day, I have no doubt. The million plus that decided to opt out, right?
Yes.
It doesn't matter. I suspect they came across the color line, across the political divide. It has very much to do with British sovereignty and what it can offer its own before it can accommodate a visitor.
Okay.
That principle is very fundamental for me.
But my rejoinder to that would be the treatment of British people towards African, Caribbean, and Asian population who have been second, third, fourth generation British,
yes,
is also very problematic. And I think the other thing that's quite problematic is the role that this new wave the old wave of immigrants, of first, second generation immigrants played in keeping others out. In the interest of this, as my friend says, British sovereignty, but a British sovereignty that does not treat them well. I spent some years as an exile in the UK.
Yeah.
It was not a happy experience through the 80s and the 90s. These debates have been fomenting for a long time. And I think that this points to a very ugly isolationism that is very narrow. And the kind of the kind of right-wing forces, such as in the Netherlands, in Norway, even in France, who, contrary to popular belief, are not as much of an EU nationalist as we would imagine, is very troubling. And that kind of fragmentation goes completely against the origins of the EU, which, remember, was that they said at the end of the war they never want to go at war with each other again.
On that Brexit note, let us also exit. And that was question time for today. Goodbye.